All right, on this episode of Bowks Talking Bouts, excited to be talking to an individual who is the CEO of PKA Worldwide, a 10th degree black belt, a Hall of Famer, and there's a lot going on in the world of PKA that I'm very excited to get into, and talking to Joe Corley, welcoming him on the show for the very first time. How's your day going so far, Joe? Fairly busy, I would presume?
Yeah, it's busy, but good busy. Not crazy busy. So we're excited. We have our trials coming up in Fort Worth. It's our second trial so far, and that comes up a week from Saturday. So we're excited about that. Going to have some great fighters there in Fort Worth.
Yeah, I'm super excited to see that, but I guess some of my first questions before we really dig into that, PKA Worldwide obviously has a great lineage and has been around for quite a while. It's kind of more emerging in the public eye now. Why did now kind of feel like the right time to come out and have that bigger push with these tryouts and different things like that? Did the landscape kind of seem right for it, or?
Yeah, it did. Back we were the pioneers. So as you know, the pioneers take all the arrows. And back when we were doing great ratings on ESPN and NBC and CBS, combat sports just didn't seem like a viable sport for people that were major advertisers at the time. And so we didn't have the financial backing that we needed. And, even UFC from 1994 through 2001 didn't have the financial backing it needed. But then once that Dana White and the Fertitta brothers got involved in the UFC, they were able to put the funds behind it required, and then they followed some great business principles. And as you know, their $2 million investment turned into a $4,000 million investment for them, about 15 years later. And so now, of course, it's so accepted around the world, combat sports is, that we figured that we were really the first ones to have professional martial arts on television here in North America, that this would be a great time for us to come back out.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like you said, you guys had really laid the groundwork years ago, but now different promotions like Karate Combat and stuff like that are out there. So really seems like a great time for the stand-up arts and contact karate more specifically.
Yeah, we'll be the only ones out there that aren't kicking each other in the legs. So we'll be a category of one. I guess combat karate may be the closest to us, but they are kicking each other in the legs. And then when they take the opponents down to the floor, they're following up with strikes to them on the floor. And we don't do that in the PKA, so we'll really be a kind of a category of one with the rules that we evolved over a number of 20 years. Actually, we really kept refining and refining and refining the rules so that, for example, when we did the great fights up there in Canada with Jean-Yves Thériault, the rules were so great and produced such great action. We don't see any reason to broke it, because to fix it, I should say, because that wheel was never broken.
Yeah, it's all about punch, kick, repeat, eh?
Punch, kick, and repeat. That's correct.
Yeah, it's a great organization for sure, and I was really excited to see all of that. And it's kind of interesting because before you were talking about years ago, maybe some of these different groups didn't necessarily see the forward potential in certain combat sports and maybe weren't investing in it. I understand PKA got a fairly big investment just a bit earlier this month. So does that sort of translate just how different the landscape is, and just from your vantage point, that must have been pretty cool there?
Yeah, it really was. The pay-per-view world was the only world that people could have gotten the kind of return that they would be looking for their investment. In today's streaming world, and everything that's happened digitally around the world makes things so much different. But we have always felt in PKA that we had the kind of action inside the ring, and then the kind of personalities that we were able to attract and develop, that we would have the ability to do big time pay-per-view events, just like have happened in boxing and then more recently in the UFC world.
Yeah, and it's an interesting dynamic too, just with these tryouts coming up and stuff like that. It seems like there's a lot of the lineage still very much present, like certain individuals like Rick Rufus being involved. I mean, Bill Wallace, yourself, obviously. I would think that would be a cool dynamic for like some of the younger kind of fighters that are going to be out here and just revealing themselves as some of the, great strikers in the world. I would think that would be a cool thing for them. Maybe a bit of a funny thing to put in your kind of court there, but I would think there would be that level of like respect and like, oh wow, this is like a big stage here. I'm surrounded by guys I kind of grew up watching and like wanting to be, essentially.
Yeah, the president of our sports division is Jeff Smith, and Jeff had a fight in Milwaukee in around 1979, 1980. It was one of our early ESPN events. We were on ESPN the first week they were on the air. So during that first year or so, we ended up with a Jeff fighting someone in Milwaukee, and this kid, 12 years old, comes up to me and he says, and Jeff Smith, and he says, guys, would you guys help me become the champion of the world one day? And we said, of course, kid, we'll be glad to help you with that. That kid turned out to be Rick Rufus. And
wow.
So when he was 19, we had him in our Battle of Atlanta and had him on ESPN winning his first world title bout. And then, of course, he went on to do all kinds of great things, including finally building up in PKA Karate Mania 8 to fighting Jean-Yves Thériault there in Montreal. And then went on to, because we went into kind of a hiatus there for about 9 years, and then he went into K1 and won all other kind of titles, and most people think of him as the most dynamic and the most well-rounded fighter in kickboxing history, in all of kickboxing history. So it really is neat. But to your original point, we have 3 10th degrees, myself, Bill Wallace, and Jeff Smith. So I'm the CEO, Jeff is the president, and Bill Wallace is our international ambassador. And then we have 9 ninth degree black belts. We have 3 ninth degree black belts, and among us we have about 354 years of experience. So it's kind of neat. Most sports are owned and promoted by business people on the outside, but it's nice to have so many of us who actually fought and competed in the sport be involved at the business level of it, and then surround ourselves, like I was telling you, before we went on, having people surround us that are smarter than we are and who have more ideas and insights that we have. But, to have your own sport really being run by the people that were in the middle of it is pretty unique and very exciting to all of us.
Yeah, and I would think that there's a lot of excitement coming out for the competitors and everything like that, and just I like the dynamic, just like being at the Travis Lutter, BJJ area there and stuff like that, and yeah.
Yeah, the trials are kind of like a mix of America's Got Talent or American Idol plus auditions in the ring. So in our case here at the cage, so 2 fighters will be in the cage, and there'll be 4 judges on the outside, all of them in this case world champions. So you'll have Jeff Smith will be our Simon Cowell, so to speak, and then next to him you'll have Bill Wallace and Rick Rufus, and then another world champion sitting next to them. And the athletes will go 2 rounds against each other, audition 2 2-minute rounds, and then the judges will give them feedback and have one of them go on to the next round. So hour or so later, it'll get in the ring with another, or the cage with another winner, and then go another 2 2-minute rounds, and then the winner will move on, and then the third match of the day, they'll be against another winner and do 3 2-minute rounds. So it'll be a total of 7 rounds during the course of the day, getting feedback from the judges at each step along the way, and then that winner that day will go into our semifinals, which we'll probably end up doing in Las Vegas within the next 90 to 120 days.
Yeah, and I was noticing the PKA striking cage is it's like the framework they're going to be showing their skill set within. Like, why was the decision to kind of have it in the confines of a cage? Like, how did that decision come about?
Well, as we're reaching newer viewers than we had before, these people grew up with watching everything in the cage. Way back when, cage fights in wrestling were the big fights that they all built up to. That all the wrestlers wrestle inside the ring, But then when they went to a cage fight, excuse me one second. When they went to a cage fight, that meant they couldn't climb out of the ring, in wrestling. So you knew you were at the big fight. So I think when UFC had everybody in a cage, it really made for a great dynamic. And now a whole generation of fans has grown up seeing most of the exciting fights inside the cage. That all happened at a time when a lot of boxers were holding on to each other in the ring. There would be a 3-minute round, and they might spend 2 of those minutes just hanging on to each other. And so we felt like if we put our strikers in the cage, that it would give them a better format for the new fans. Once we got in the cage, Dylan, what we found was that the not having those corners, those 4 corners of the ring, actually made it much better for the kickers. When you're in the corner and your back's against the corner post and you've got that 90-degree angle, it's very difficult to be able to kick. So that means in about 4/9 of the ring, almost half of the ring, you weren't able to kick. So this way, our fighters told us that they actually can be more free to do more kicks. And as you know, our fighters have to throw 8 powerful kicks in a round, all aimed above the waist. And in our very first trials in New York, we had a lot of fighters come in from MMA, and they said we had no idea it was going to take so much energy for us to try to throw kicks above the waist. They also didn't realize how much in jeopardy that was going to put them. But in the PKA rules, then you have, tremendous amount of action, and no holding is allowed. If you hold more than once, then you start having real points deducted, not just threats of deductions, but real deductions happening. So the fighters know not to hold and to kick powerfully, and so there's a lot of action. But the cage feels like it's going to be a great new home for us.
Yeah, I just love all the different martial arts tie-ins there. Talking about UFC very early on. Bill Superfoot Wallace was part of that. Obviously you guys have your competitive history, and I've seen also people refer to you even as a founding father of where MMA is at in the modern day. And as much as MMA is a big thing, it seems like there's also the focus on different individual disciplines as well, say more grappling focused stuff, more striking focused kind of stuff. Just in your journey, what do you think about this certain period in terms of martial arts having that visibility? I would think you would find it quite exciting.
Oh, in 1979, we sat down in our office in Beverly Hills at the time, and we said we want to be the world's first publicly owned sport. And at that time, I think it was the Minnesota Vikings were was it the Vikings or one other team was owned locally by the public, but not on a national basis. So we were going to become the world's first publicly owned sport. Then that didn't work out because of the timing that we were talking about. But when we first met with Dana White to talk about our 2022 plans, I said to Dana, I said, thank you. He said, for what? I said, because you pushed across the goal line the plan that we set in motion, 4 decades ago. And Jeff Smith and I would say, he did a big smile, a big thank you smile. And Jeff and I said later that the smile really kind of reflected $385 million was his reported share of the sale of UFC in 2016, and so we thought it was a $385 million smile. He said, you're certainly welcome. But we're big fight fans. All of us are fight fans. We love all of the fighters, no matter what the rules are. We love the fighting spirit and the attitude, and we really admire what the UFC has done in terms of its business model. And your question was, are we excited by the prospects of the way the world has changed? We certainly are.
Yeah, and obviously, my fandom is a little lesser than yours. You've been in it for a long period of time, but just I love seeing just the landscape nowadays. It kind of reminds me of the days of K1 when it was really firing off and was a big thing. It's good to see that nowadays. I'm a fan of all the different martial arts, but the stand-up arts, I'm certainly partial to. That was kind of like how I first started getting into fighting, really.
Yeah, did you train yourself there in Canada?
A little bit, yeah. A couple of years when I was in high school. I would like to get back to it, though. It was a good way to, keep fit and good sense of community, like the people you train with.
You're in Toronto.
Like pretty close, Greater Toronto area. I'm in a place called Oshawa. It's about like 45 minutes outside, kind of thing.
Yeah. We have a good friend up there, Cesar Borkowski, who's got the Northern Karate Schools, who is a really great guy. If you get a chance, look him up. He's just tremendous. He's just done such a great job with the schools he's put together. Great talent, great life skills that they cover for the kids there, and just has really great. I think he's 15, 16 schools there in the Toronto area.
Yeah, I would love to, talk to him. I'm always down to talk to people that have a wealth of martial arts knowledge. I just like to sit under the learning tree there for sure. But just in terms of PKA Worldwide, obviously there's this great event coming up in, August on the 27th there. What's the, schedule going forward? What's the grander kind of plan for strength of schedule, amount of events you guys would like to put on, etc.?
We're going to do 6 to 8 of these tryouts around the country. Originally, we looked at 3 on the East Coast, 3 on the West Coast, and 2 down the center of the country. Now it might be 2, 2, and 2. But at the end of that, we'll have 8 people in each one of 5 weight divisions who will be fighting among themselves to challenge our number 1 seed for our 2022 PKA World Champions. And so we will have people, like Stephen Thompson as an example from UFC. If we were able to have a Stephen Thompson as a seed, then we'd have those 8 finalists fight one bout that would take them down to 4, and then when our television series begins, our very first event would have those 4 fighters that would be challenging an opponent like a Stephen Thompson would fight among themselves, and we would end up with 2 that night. And on that same night, a person like a Stephen Thompson would fight another fighter as the main event on that card that night. Assuming that he won and went forward, then the next time out, those 2 fighters would fight each other, and the number 1 winner would then end up against Stephen Thompson in a pay-per-view event at the end of the sequence. So 7, 8 months in is when we would go to the grand finale. We'd have 5 world title fights on that same card. But in the meantime, you'd have 6 cards building up to it that would profile not only the seeded fighters, but would profile all the people in the tournament that were fighting to be facing the seeded fighters.
Yeah, I love the layout and the setup of everything. It sounds very exciting there for sure, and I would think it would be very exciting for prospective talents to get involved. It seems like there's only a certain amount of invitations one would get, but it seems like prospective fighters can register at PKA Worldwide. Is that the main way people can get involved? Say if a martial artist happens to be listening to this and wanting to get involved, that would be the main way to at least put in the demo, as it were.
You're exactly right. PKAWorldwide.com. They'll be able to sign up to participate in the competition if they like. They can learn how to become individual members of PKA. Their schools can become PKA associated schools. As you mentioned, Rick Rufus, he's our global director for fighter development. So any fighters interested who may not be ready now but would like to figure out where to go and how to be involved, they can reach out and Rick can guide them on that path. And we even have a wellness coach, Ulrika Eriksson, a Swedish wellness coach. We decided that in the fight game, there's a lot of drama and heartache and headache that come with fighting and winning and losing, and so we decided we would have somebody on staff in PKA because, from the rules, and something we didn't talk about, Dylan, but from the rules, one of our main goals is to make sure that we reduce the number of injuries to the athletes, number 1, and that creates more excitement in the fights themselves, number 2, but then number 3, that we can have our own Tom Brady's who can fight, into their early 40s maybe even mid-40s, and not have all these tremendous problems like fighters have when they go through a whole career of people smashing their legs. Every athlete in the world has to move from point A to point B on something called his legs, and we're the only sport that is kickboxing with leg kicks that allows you to go in and try to destroy the number one tool that the opponent has. We're thinking like if you were watching a Montreal Expos game and the batter could just go out to the pitcher's mound and hit the pitcher in the arm with his bat. What would that do to the dynamics of the pitcher? So we really are looking forward to having healthy, long-living, performing fighters, and that's what the wellness coach will help us with. She'll help us with the problems that the fighters might have that don't have anything to do with their bodies, but maybe more with their minds.
Yeah, I love the consideration of just like, the maintaining of the body, just the physical preservation, because that is, such a good point. Like one of the few sports where like the legs, like such an integral part of it, is just actively getting damaged as being part of it. But like one of the last kind of things I wanted to touch on here, because I think it's cool just like how much of like a competitive resume you have, but also on the broadcast end of things, like both as like a producer, just like thousands of hours of like covering kickboxing and everything like that, and also as an on-screen presenter. Like how much of that do you enjoy? Just like, I mean, you have got the great knowledge competitive wise and everything like that, but you also have like a very sharpened eye for the broadcast end of things. I would think that people who are wanting to check out PKA Worldwide would be taking in like a very, well produced and polished kind of show.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I actually, it's funny you ask it right now, because I just finished this morning, as a matter of fact, an article from a first-person point of view on how CBS first invited me to do that, and the experience I had in my very first fight as an analyst. I got a chance to cover Bill Wallace live on CBS Sports Spectacular, and CBS had invited me to do that because they said they liked the way that I explained the sport. And on that same night, I got a chance to cover a fight between Benny Urquidez and Howard Jackson and Ross Scott against Everett Eddy. So we had 3 world title fights there, and I really fell in love with it. Fortunately for me, I had Gary Bender working with me. We had a great production crew at CBS. CBS invited me back then to do those events quarterly for Bill Wallace. They were doing live quarterly events on CBS Sports Spectacular. We did that all the way through his retirement in 1980, which we did live on Father's Day. Then NBC, Sean McManus was then the vice president of sports at NBC, went on to become the president of sports and news over at CBS after that. He invited me to do it at NBC, and then Showtime had me do it. I did it on Turner Sports and USA Network as well. So what you're saying is true. I got a lot of experience doing that, but it gave me a chance to educate 2 generations of fight fans and give them the insights on what the fighters were like, what their thinking was like. And having been a fighter, it gave me a little bit of a heads up. And you can't believe the number of people that still come up to me in airports and say that they and their kids actually got involved in the martial arts because we did a self-defense tip of the week on the air. Wallace and I did. He did a fitness tip, and I did a defense tip of the week. And we have just tens of thousands of people that got involved in the martial arts from watching that on ESPN during those years. Yeah, so thank you for pointing that out. And it really is it really is one of those things that kind of makes me feel a little different than the average commentator out there.
Oh, yeah, well, you're certainly not an average commentator by any means. Very much have had that generational influence, and I would think you would be excited to, encroach into, like, another generation with this next effort here. And, I mean, I could really talk to you all day just considering the resume in martial arts, but I do want to be mindful of your schedule and your time there and everything, man. So to that point, is there maybe anything you might want to add kind of as a parting thought as we're wrapping up, Joe?
Well, I would say to the potential fans out there to stay tuned, that you're going to get a chance to see some really dynamic fighting, and to the athletes that are out there that are looking forward to a a career in martial arts to know that, for example, like these 195 countries that are tied in with Taekwondo into the Olympics and have been tied in with karate to the Olympics, that these 195 countries, amateur athletes, their Taekwondo and karate athletes, are now going to have a place to go for their professional careers. So we invite all of them to reach out to us as you mentioned, at pkaworldwide.com and get as much information as you can so you can start laying your plans. Because at the end of this first year, we're going to be opening this thing up to the entire world.
Yeah, well, it looks hugely exciting, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing how the story unfurls there. But the first chapter and all of that, or the next chapter at the very least, August 27th, Fort Worth, Texas. Going to be some amazing strikers coming out there for those tryouts. And just really super appreciate you making some time to talk today, Joe. You enjoy the rest of your day, and just best of luck with this, next promotional effort here on the 27th.
Thanks, Dylan. Nice to speak with you.